I'm over 70 years old, with a chest full of medals and a lifetime of victories. I had our enemies, the Laurentians, suing for peace. We were on the verge of unifying the continent under one flag. Then the king's daughter, Princess Isabella, fell for the Laurentian crown prince. She stole our entire northern defense strategy, a gift-wrapped dowry, and ran off to be his mistress. My life's work, all of it, up in smoke. The Laurentians used her intel to launch a surprise attack. I led 100,000 of our best soldiers in a desperate defense, but it was no use. I died on that frozen, bloody battlefield. Then I opened my eyes. I was back. Back on the day the king, unable to deny his pouting daughter anything, allowed her to visit the troops at the front. When we were in the middle of a national security briefing in the White Palace's Situation Room, discussing matters of state, when the doors burst open. It was her, of course, the most spoiled brat in the Federation, Princess Isabella. She flounced right over to her father, whining loud enough for everyone to hear. Daddy, I want to join the army too. Please let me go, please. Everyone says I'm just a useless socialite. It makes me so mad. Once General Corrigan conquers Laurenia, he can give me a little credit for the victory, and then they'll have to shut up. The sheer audacity it took to say something like that. This is war, not a goddamn reality show. But the king had that same old indulgent look on his face, just like the first time. After a few more seconds of his daughter's pouting, he threw his hands up with a booming laugh. All right, Daddy says yes. Is that what you want to hear? General, he said, turning to me, my precious daughter is in your hands. You will ensure her absolute safety. That's an order. In my first life, I believe an order was an order. I gritted my teeth and accepted. The moment we stepped out of the Situation Room, Isabella started spinning her story. She told anyone who would listen that I, General Jack Corrigan, had personally scouted her, that I saw in her a once-in-a-generation strategic talent. She claimed I was the one who championed her, insisting that a woman of her caliber be allowed in a forward command post. It was her and the king's idiotic decision, but she made damn sure I took the blame for it. The story spread like wildfire, and plenty of people in the military actually bought it. That's how she was able to just walk into the command tent and take the digital battle plans. It's how she was able to ride right out of the gates. They thought she was leading a charge, try to win some glorious victory. When she returned with the Laurentian army at her back, surrendering herself to their prince, they all thought it was some brilliant gambit, a Trojan horse strategy. Blinded by her lies, my soldiers opened the main gate and lowered their weapons. They were slaughtered like cattle. And through it all, they had to watch her, nestled against the enemy prince, giggling and asking for praise. In my first life, my personal security detail died to a man getting me out of that initial trap. But I didn't retreat. I charged straight for them. Ignoring my wounds, I shattered the flagstaff of our regiment and stormed their command vehicle. I thrust my combat knife forward, aiming to take the prince's head. But the princess threw herself in front of him, taking the fatal blow meant for her lover. I saw red. I wanted to tear her apart right then and there. This time, there would be no more bowing to the king's wishes. I shut him down, my voice like ice. The battlefield isn't a playground. The princess has no place there. The king, who had been basking in his daughter's saccharine compliments just a moment before, turned purple. Seeing me defy him so openly, his face went dark. General, are you getting too old for this? Can't handle the fight anymore? If you can't even manage this simple task, what use are you to me? I thought of the grass and tree bark my soldiers were forced to eat just to survive. I thought of the shoddy, worn-out gear they were issued. I thought of the countless times we could have won decisive victories, only to be halted by a royal decree from this man, ordering a retreat that got tens of thousands of my men killed in ambushes. A king can be ignorant of military matters. He can be strategically inept, but he should not be this recklessly, criminally stupid. All my life, I was blinded by 4 words: duty, honor, country, king. And I dedicated myself to protecting this fool and his treacherous daughter. Even when I knew she was a fraud, I kept my mouth shut to protect her reputation, to protect the king's precious image. I never exposed her publicly. That day, in this new life, we left on bitter terms. Deployments always require weeks of planning and logistical work. Last time, the princess had charmed her father into fast-tracking the whole thing. This time, without my cooperation, things were going to get very, very slow. 2. Even though I shot her down in the Situation Room and publicly humiliated her, she still went around spinning the same old story about how I was her biggest supporter. People will believe any rumor they hear. And besides, she was a princess. Who would think a princess would lie? Her ridiculous fantasy gained traction. I was in a debrief with my officers, talking until my throat was raw. I stepped out to grab a bite to eat at a local joint and heard the whispers. She really has no shame at all. I slammed my whiskey glass down on the table. Since when is the princess a military genius? That's news to me. My voice cut through the murmurs in the restaurant. If there's one thing I can't stand, it's an armchair general with clean fingernails and big ideas who wants to stick their nose where it doesn't belong. I didn't just debunk her lies in public. I had my aide make sure that statement was plastered over every news network. I would not let anyone be fooled by her again. I would not let history repeat itself. The entire capital was laughing at her. I heard the porcelain shops in Washington, D.C. ran out of stock from all the plates she was smashing in her tantrums at the royal residence. I allowed myself a small, grim smile. I figured I'd made my position so clear, been so ruthless, that she'd finally leave me alone. The next morning, she was camped outside my Georgetown townhouse. The historic, lacquered red front door of my home was drenched in raw sewage. The stench carried for blocks. Even the usual gaggle of reporters and gawkers stayed away, pinching their noses and running. Liquid filth, a dirty tactic from the old wars. I'd used it against enemies myself, but I never thought, not in a million years, that it would be used against me. Here, in the nation's capital, under the shadow of the monuments I'd spent my life defending, by the daughter of the man I served. If I hadn't already known what a vile creature she was, if I hadn't already been hardened by her betrayal in my past life, the shock might have given me a stroke right there on the sidewalk. Instead, I just told my staff to keep the doors locked, slipped out the back, and went straight to the White Palace to report her. I knelt before my king, an old soldier with tears in his eyes, describing the princess's disgusting act of vandalism. I thought, at the very least, he would give her a slap on the wrist. Teach her some respect. But this is what he said. Isabella is just a child, Jack. She was playing a prank on you. You embarrassed her first. This was just her getting a little payback. A minor reprimand. You're a grown man, a decorated general. Are you really going to hold a grudge against a girl who just turned 18? His words chill me to the bone. His own end in the last life wasn't pretty. Because of his daughter's foolishness, he lost everything. Our cities were occupied, our territory ceded. He was forced to bow and scrape before his former enemies, just to be allowed to live out his days in obscurity. I used to think it was all Isabella's fault, that he was just an unlucky man, cursed with a terrible daughter. So, when I came back, my only goals were to stop the princess, defend my country, and reclaim the legacy she'd stolen from me. It never occurred to me to consider the source. The reason Isabella could be so monstrously out of control was because the king himself had enabled it, encouraged it, every step of the way. What happened to him last time, he deserved it. The only victims were me, my soldiers, and the citizens of this country. Just then, the princess herself arrived. She stormed in and drew a riding crop, lashing out at me. I'm maybe over 70, but I can still handle myself on a battlefield. I dodged it easily. But because I was kneeling, the movement was awkward, and I ended up scrambling on the floor. I looked at the king. He showed no displeasure at his daughter's assault. Instead, his face was full of doting affection. Oh, he cooed at her. Always so mischievous. Why get your own hands dirty? A simple task like this, you can just have the staff do it. So because she missed, it was my fault for dodging. He was suggesting she get someone more competent to assault me next time. My face was stone. I refused to watch another second of this sickening family moment. I got on my feet and walked out. 3 in the end, the command for the northern offensive still fell to me. I was the Federation's anchor, the one man whose name alone could make the enemy think twice. The king might be a hedonist, but he wasn't a complete moron. He wouldn't sideline his most effective general. But unlike the last time, where my expedition was at least reasonably well funded, what he provided me with now was a joke. Uniforms that looked like they were stripped off homeless people. Rations that were green with mold. Rifles that would jam if you looked at them wrong. I had to laugh. Did he think I was patent reincarnated? Even Patton couldn't win a war with this pile of garbage. I was still wrestling with a supply crisis when we were 2 days' march from D.C. A figure with straw sticking out of her hair stumbled into my command tent. It was the princess. She swaggered in and announced, "Give me a hot bath. I want to wash up, and bring me some new clothes. Silk, and make it snappy. What the hell are you doing here?" I growled. She must have hidden in one of the supply trucks, waiting until we were too far from the capital for me to send her back. The lengths she would go to see that Laurentian prince were almost impressive. No wonder she was able to play the part of his star-crossed lover for years in the last life. She acted just as entitled the first time around. But back then, because of her, the king had actually increased our budget. So everyone was willing to kiss her ass. Life on the march was hard, but the men did their best to fulfill her ridiculous demands. The entire camp tried to show her kindness. She even claimed to have made friends with a few of the junior officers. And yet, despite all that, she took their trust and kindness, and she used it. She casually strolled out with our defense plans, a gift for the prince she'd been exchanging secret letters with for months. She personally opened the gates for the enemy. She let those men, the men who had trusted her, followed her, and would have died for her, be cut down by a volley of enemy fire. Those men had offered her their genuine loyalty. They were patriots, ready to die to protect her family's country. But they didn't die on the battlefield. They died for her pathetic high school romance, and they took a whole damn city with them. My face twisted into a mask of rage. I barked at my personal guard. "Arrest this intruder. She's trespassing in a secure military zone." My guard are loyal to me and me alone. They moved instantly, slamming the princess to the ground and tying her hands. If I ordered them to assassinate the king, they wouldn't hesitate. They would just do it. With her face pressed into the dirt floor of the tent, the princess was still screaming. "This is insubordination. I'll have my father hang you all for this. And you senile old bastard, what do you think you're doing? You've been undermining me since we were in D.C. You're doing this just to spite me." I was wondering why the princess, who at least put on a polite facade last time, was acting so unhinged now. Of course, it was because my attitude was different. I waved my hand, and my guard dragged her away to be locked in a makeshift brig. It wasn't that I didn't want to just kill her and be done with it. It was that a much, much better idea had just occurred to me. She's so desperately in love with the enemy prince, isn't she? Willing to hide in a truck full of moldy food for 3 days just to see him. When our armies are facing each other, even in these worst conditions, she will absolutely try to steal the defense plans for him again. What if I prepare a fake set of plans for her in advance? A wicked grin spread across my face. My adjutant, seeing my expression, shivered and took a step back. "She's just a princess, sir. It's not like the king can court-martial us for this, right? You want to lock her up? Lock her up. I won't say another word. Just please, sir, stop smiling like that. It's creeping me out. For no matter how clever my plans, the reality for most of my soldiers remained the same. Empty stomachs and threadbare uniforms. They were like a swarm of locusts, so desperate they'd started chewing on grass, fighting the horses for feed. It was like a knife in my gut every time I saw it. But the king had been shorting our military budget for years. I'd already exhausted my personal fortune long ago, trying to fill the gaps. Now I was sharing their watery vegetable soup, doing what little I could to keep morale from completely collapsing. And right in the middle of this crisis, my guard reported that the princess was on a hunger strike. I needed her alive. I had a very important use for her. I certainly wasn't going to let her starve. The food she was getting, while it probably had a bit of a musty taste, was still better than mine. But in her eyes, this small consideration was a profound insult. She'd thrown the food on the floor and was screaming her head off. When I went to see her, she showered me with curses. I looked at the wasted food on the ground, my heart aching with regret. "If the princess doesn't want to eat," I said calmly, "then don't feed her. I tried it myself. On nothing but water, an old man like me can survive for over a month. If she didn't want to eat, fine. We'd save a ration." My mind was made up. I had a platform built and assembled every soldier in the camp. I asked them a simple question. "Do you want a full meal?" Their response was a weak, scattered mumble. "Yes." I raised my voice, roaring with all the strength I had left. "Do you want a full meal? Answer me. You tell me you're hungry, and I swear I will get you fed." This time they roared back. Yes. I continued, my voice ringing with conviction. Good. You're hungry, so we're going to eat. I swear, even if I have to throw away my reputation, my honor, everything, our soldiers will go into battle with full bellies and warm coats. We are done with this humiliation. We are done being treated like this. I smashed a ceramic mug on the stage, the signal we'd agreed upon. I led my army not towards the enemy, but towards the nearest Federation city. I had a list from my past life. A list of the two-faced corporate vultures who collaborated with the Laurentians, selling out our country for a profit. We hit their warehouses and their mansions. The money came flooding in. The food came flooding in. And, as expected, a royal decree from the king came, too, accusing me of treason. Those corporate fat cats all had friends in high places. Their obscene profits flowed upward, lining the pockets of politicians, lobbyists, and maybe even the king's own family. I didn't care. Seeing my soldiers in new winter gear, holding bowls of hot beef stew, was all that mattered. I refused the decree outright. On the front lines, a general's orders supersede the king's. My lieutenant speared the parchment from the messenger's hands. The man, a high-level aide from the capital, shrieked. He struck a pose, one hand on his hip, trembling with rage. Is this a mutiny? Mutiny? I chuckled. I call it seizing an opportunity that God himself has given me. My biggest mistake in my last life was not sitting on the throne myself. God, or whatever you want to call it, gave me a second chance. And if that's the case, then I was born to be the one in charge. So what if I'm 70? That's the perfect age to start something new. I had the messenger tied up and thrown in the brig with the princess for company. Isabella, who was on the verge of a complete breakdown, saw him and immediately started demanding he help her get word to her father. The two of them spent the whole night crying and cursing my name. The next day, I had one of my men bring a tray of steaming, delicious food to their cell. He placed it right in front of the royal aide. But just as the man was about to dig in, my soldier stopped him. Oh, I almost forgot. The princess is fasting for her spiritual purity. And you, being her father's most trusted confidant, should naturally join her in solidarity. With that, he packed the food back up, turned with a flourish, and marched out. My guard came back and gave me a hilarious, blow-by-blow description of the aide's horrified expression. He told me the moment he left, the two former allies started screaming at each other over the meal. So much for their united front. 5 with full bellies and high spirits. My army finally reached the Laurentian frontier. The border garrison was in a pathetic state. Forget their equipment. The men themselves were walking skeletons, hollowed out by starvation. I already knew how bad things were at the border. There was no point in blaming the king anymore. I just ordered my men to slaughter our fattest livestock and cook a feast. First, we would make sure our brothers in arms had a decent meal. Later that night, I drank with them, my voice booming with confidence as I laid out my military strategy. And on that same night, full of food and wine, a moment of carelessness from the guards gave the princess the perfect opportunity to escape. As she fled, she stole the fake defense plans I had so thoughtfully prepared for her. Just as I predicted, the fool made the exact same choice she did in her last life. And because she had suffered so much on the journey here, she couldn't even wait a few days. The moment she arrived at the frontier, she made her move. What had surprised me was the royal aide. He didn't escape with the princess. Instead, he came crawling to me, kneeling and begging to report a crime. This man, who normally only bowed to the king, was a sniveling, tear-streaked mess before me. General, sir, I must expose the princess's heinous treason. She stole the defense plans and fled the fortress. I saw which way she went. If we move now, we can still catch her. I was surprised by his choice, but I played along. If you saw her, why didn't you stop her yourself? A senior White Palace official like him could surely overpower a pampered princess. The aide froze, the act dropping from his face. He stayed kneeling, silent, and embarrassed. The reason was obvious. If the princess escaped, his value to me would be much greater. He was timing it perfectly, making sure she wouldn't actually succeed in helping the enemy, but still letting her go. If he was going to switch sides, he was going to make sure he was the star player. After letting him sweat for a moment, I sent a squad of my guards out to give chase. They returned a short while later, empty-handed. The squad leader knelt before me and the assembled officers, his voice full of feigned remorse. Sir, when I caught up to them, I saw the princess in the arms of the Laurentian crown prince. I tried to retrieve her, but I was hopelessly outnumbered. I failed in my duty. Please punish me, sir. The entire camp erupted in shock and outrage. No one could accept this. The royal aide, in particular, looked like his whole world had just ended. But he recovered quickly, forcing a smile onto his face. It was a grotesque sight, his old face crinkling like a dried flower, as he congratulated me. General, your foresight is truly astonishing. From the very beginning, even before we left the capital, you saw no value in that Princess Isabella. At the time, many whispered that you were being petty, feuding with a young girl. A bunch of blind fools. The general, in his wisdom, saw her for the traitor she truly was. He really had a talent for this, the old snake. No wonder he could handle the king's mercurial temper. The man knew how to flatter. I let him grovel for a while before I spoke. The princess and the Laurentian prince have been corresponding for some time. I simply thought it was a childish infatuation. While I disapproved of her, I let my voice trail off, shaking my head with a heavy sigh. But now the deed is done. According to Mr. Vance, the princess has stolen our defense plans. They're most likely in the hands of the enemy prince by now. I didn't mention, of course, that the plans were a complete fabrication. I needed every soldier here to despise her. I needed her betrayal to become a rallying cry. Only then would my next move be justified. My face grew grim. Gentlemen, we must now prepare for a massive enemy assault. But this fortress is crumbling, our supplies are limited, and we have only 20,000 men. I have no choice. I must conscript soldiers from the local population. I put on a show of reluctance and despair. But in my heart, I was doing the math. All that money we'd acquired from those corrupt contractors back east. Would it be enough to raise an army of 100,000? Or maybe even more? 6 years of famine, and what does the government do? Nothing. No disaster relief, just one pointless war after another. The people were living desperate lives. When word got out that signing up with General Corrigan meant a steady paycheck and 3 hot meals a day, they came in droves. Entire families packed up and headed for the frontier. So when Princess Isabella and her Laurentian prince finally led their army to our gates, what they found waiting for them wasn't a starving, broken garrison. It was 150,000 of my finest. They were healthy, well-equipped, and after a month of good food, they were itching for a chance to repay my kindness. The Laurentians pushed the princess out to the front lines. She called out, announcing her identity, telling us to open the gates for her. She was trying the same trick again, hoping to fool us into letting their army walk right in. But my men weren't demoralized. They started cheering, whooping and hollering, brandishing their weapons and yelling at the gatekeepers to hurry up and let them out. Seeing their enthusiasm, I let out a proud laugh. But I still raised my voice from the command vehicle. Everyone, stand down. The enemy is a disorganized mob. I don't want to see a single one of you get hurt playing the hero. You will follow my orders to the letter. I gave the signal, and the main gate creaked open. The princess hiked up her skirt and ran back towards the Laurentian lines, throwing herself into the prince's arms. Alaric, my love, I did it. The prince hugged her, a smug, doting smile on his face. He gently tapped her on the nose and said, I knew you could do it. That's the woman I chose. Of course, I already have a fiancé, so you'll have to settle for being my official consort. I don't care about titles, she cooed. As long as I can be by your side, I'll be happy. There they were, right in front of 2 massive armies, flirting like a couple of teenagers. The arrogant, demanding princess was suddenly transformed into a gentle, submissive lamb. It was enough to make an old man like me physically ill. I'd had enough of this nonsense. I gave a signal. Light him up. 50,000 of my troops poured from the city. Another 100,000, hidden in the surrounding hills, rose up from their positions. We wrapped them up like a burrito. It was a classic pincer movement, and we took the entire army captive without breaking a sweat. Once again, the princess was on her knees in front of me, a prisoner. The prince was right there beside her. I chuckled and turned to Silas Vance, the former royal aide. You know, they almost look like they're getting married. Should we get a red cloth and parade them through the streets? Let everyone get a good look at this happy couple. 150,000 men, is a lot of men. Even if I screamed my lungs out, most of them couldn't hear me. Besides the front ranks, the average soldier had no idea just how disgusting these two really were. And I'm a man who believes in sharing. Everyone deserved to see them for what they were. After a thorough public humiliation, I handed the princess and the prince over to Silas. My soldiers are good at fighting, but they don't know the first thing about inflicting torment without leaving a mark. For a job like that, you need a professional sycophant. It would also seal his fate, ensuring he had no path back to his old life. He was with me now, for better or worse. 7 Silas Vance was a true artist. After I told him my only rule was not to kill the two of them, he got to work. He had the Laurentian prince castrated and his face tattooed. Then he had the princess's beautiful face ruined, tattooing her with a matching design. Now, anyone who saw them would know instantly that they were a pair. I can see why the king was so fond of the man. I pointed a finger at Silas, laughing as I spoke to my adjutant. This guy, I tell you, he's a keeper. Why can't I ever come up with ideas this twisted? Silas knew I was mocking him, but he just beamed, his old face wrinkling with pleasure. He even patted his own cheek and said, "To see the general so happy makes it all worthwhile, sir." The pleasantries were nice, but the war wasn't over. In fact, now that we had captured their crown prince, the Laurentians were sending even more troops than they did in my first life. Back in the capital, the king's corrupt allies were working against me, accusing me of warmongering and demanding I surrender my command and return to D.C. to face a tribunal. I thought back to all the victories that had been snatched away from me in my past life, all because of the king's inept and cowardly meddling. A surge of fury washed over me. I had the new messenger executed on the spot. We mounted his head on a flagpole, and I roared to my assembled army. The administration is corrupt. They have poisoned the king's mind. We marched to D.C. to purge the government and save the king from his treasonous advisors. Counting our prisoners, my army now numbered over 200,000. I left half to secure the new territory and led the other half back towards the capital. Along the way, we continued our work of liberating assets from the wealthy and redistributing them to the poor. If I was going to be king, I needed a reputation, not just as a fearsome general. I needed to be seen as a man of the people, a benevolent and just leader, all that noble stuff the philosophers talk about. I wanted the throne, so I needed the people on my side. Mass executions are bad for your image, but if you're bringing prosperity to the common folk, they tend to applaud. I executed the worst of the collaborators. Then I brought some of the others, the ones who begged for forgiveness and offered their resources, into my camp. It was a classic put-down-the-butcher's knife move. It washed away a good deal of the blood from my reputation. Stories started to spread that I was some kind of folk hero, a righteous avenger cleaning up a corrupt world. By the time the king's third decree was on its way, some freelance patriot ambushed the messenger on the road, cut off his head, and brought it to me as a tribute. You want to talk about destiny? That's destiny. I told him to stick with me, starting with a position on my personal security detail. When I stormed the royal palace, the tattoos on Isabella's face had already scarred over, a permanent disfigurement. She was oblivious to the fact that her kingdom was on the brink of collapse. All she knew was that she was back under her father's protection. She chirped at me like an arrogant little bird, telling me to get on my knees and beg for mercy. I had her tied to the main gate of the palace. For every day you refuse to open this gate, I announced, she will hang here for one more day. Silas, my new specialist in dirty work, rubbed his hands together and asked, "But what if they don't care if she lives or dies? Are we just going to leave her up there?" That's right. Worst case scenario, she turns into jerky. We can send what's left to her dear old dad. It's no skin off my nose. My only regret from my last life was not killing her myself. I wasn't going to show any mercy now. I have to admit, the princess is monumentally stupid, but when used correctly, she is an incredibly effective tool. Whether it's luring an enemy army into a trap or threatening a weak-willed king, she gets the job done. You really have to try to believe it. I have to say, I was genuinely surprised when the king opened the gates the moment we hoisted Isabella onto the wall. Everyone knows the king dotes on his little princess, more than any of his sons. But more than his crown, more than his own life. The gates swung open, and the king walked out to greet me. Behind him, Two of his aides were bound and gagged. He welcomed me as a returning hero, proclaiming that the real traitors had been apprehended. So that was his plan. It seems that after a lifetime on the battlefield, I was still too loyal, too naive. Even with my army at his gates, as long as I was still shouting about purging the administration, he actually believed that's all I was here to do. The atmosphere was tense. But of course, the princess was too stupid to read the room. Even in this situation, the moment she saw her father, her arrogance returned. "Well, get me down from here already. Daddy, you have to punish him. Cut off his head. Look what he did to my face." She started sobbing and wailing. "He's your subject. If you tell him to die, he has to die. Why are you being so polite to him?" When a king commands his subject to die, the subject must die. But the original saying goes, if the king treats his subjects with respect, his subjects will serve him with loyalty. It's about mutual respect. That's what the old philosophers meant. I didn't give the order, so my men didn't move. But one of the king's men, eager to please, ran forward to cut the princess down. As the ropes were loosened and she was slowly lowered to the ground, one of my newer recruits, a bit of a hothead, rushed forward. He ended the king with a single slash of his blade. Blood sprayed across the pavement. It splattered right onto the princess's face. Her eyes went wide. Her body went rigid. She slowly raised a hand to touch the warm, sticky liquid on her cheek. The next second, a scream that could shatter glass ripped through the air. The princess's fairy tale was over. I frowned. Immediately, one of my men stuffed a dirty sock in her mouth. Once the screaming stopped, I said with a hint of feigned regret, "The new kid is a bit trigger-happy. Got ahead of himself. Well now, the man is dead. Nothing to be done about it. We'll give him a state funeral, of course. A grand one. By the way," I asked casually, "did the king have any arrangement for the succession?" Someone mentioned that while there was no official heir, the king had been partial to his fourth son. I immediately sent for the fourth son. Unfortunately, the young man had a stroke of bad luck. He died of a sudden illness on his way to the palace. I asked, with great sadness, if there were any other candidates. This time, they finally understood. No one else dared to step forward. And so, at the ripe old age of 70, I took the throne. No one objected. They all thought I was an old, senile fool, that I was throwing away my legacy for a final taste of power. They figured, I'm 70 years old. I'll be dead soon enough. Then they can take the crown back from me, and it will all be perfectly legitimate and much less messy. I saw right through them, but I let them have their little dreams. I handed off the day-to-day running of the country to my advisors. Then, with the broken princess and her beloved Laurentian prince in tow, I set off on a new campaign. I had never forgotten my true life's goal, the complete and utter destruction of the Laurentian regime. This continent has been at war for too long. It's time for a lasting peace. We fought our way to the Laurentian capital. It was there, when I finally met the crown princess, that I understood why the old king had been willing to throw open his gates for his daughter. 9 When the crown princess saw her husband, looking worse than a street beggar, her tears stopped instantly. She froze mid-stride, her arms still outstretched for an embrace. She pulled out a silk handkerchief, covered her nose and mouth, and asked with disgust, "What happened to you? How could you let yourself become this?" The prince, who had been a whimpering wreck for the entire journey, suddenly found his courage. He lunged forward, his hands wrapping around her throat as he screamed like a madman. "It's all your fault. All of it. If you hadn't forced me to seduce that idiot Isabella, none of this would have happened to me." He, the crown prince, had to take orders from his own wife? He had to seduce a woman he didn't even like? Was he a prince or a gigolo? I didn't get it. I was shocked. But I knew one thing. When something seems this crazy, there's always more to the story. Fearing some other trick, I had the crown princess handed over to my best interrogator. She didn't last 5 minutes before she spilled everything. She said our world was a book, and she was a transmigrator from another world who had read the book and knew the plot. She said Princess Isabella was the protagonist, blessed by fate, but the prince wasn't the main male lead. He was just a minor obstacle in the protagonist's love story. The crown princess told me a long, boring, and utterly ridiculous story that, I had to admit, fit a moron like Isabella perfectly. In the original story, the princess kidnaps a handsome commoner to be her husband. They have a series of misunderstandings and arguments. Finally, the commoner leaves in a fit of rage, joins the army, and gets noticed by me. After I die, he inherits my position, fulfills my lifelong dream of conquering the continent, and marries the princess. Then, the king gives him the throne. Enough. My jaw was aching from clenching it. I couldn't listen to any more of this garbage. I cut her off. First of all, I said, I have sons and grandsons of my own, all of them fine soldiers. I don't need some pretty boy from off the street to carry on my legacy. And I would never promote a weakling who could be kidnapped by the likes of Princess Isabella. Second, the former king had plenty of sons. I've never heard of a man who gives his entire kingdom to his son-in-law. The crown princess looked at me with an expression of naive, idiotic certainty. But she's the protagonist, she said, as if it explained everything. She's supposed to get everything she wants. She's blessed by destiny. That's why I had my husband get close to her. This transmigrator, using her special knowledge, had allied herself with who she thought was the story's most charming villain. She told him all about the protagonist's amazing destiny, and the prince, like the spineless fool he was, went along with the plan to seduce Isabella. And that idiot Isabella fell for it hook, line, and sinker. Their secret letters and trysts meant that the original male lead, the handsome commoner, was never even in the picture. He was probably still a nobody somewhere. So, the entire tragedy, the death of 100,000 men, was all because of some trashy romance plot. I stared at the crown princess, who was still rambling on. I could feel a bizarre sense of arrogance coming from her. Even now, as a prisoner. Even after she'd wet herself in fear just moments ago. She was still looking down on all of us, me included, with contempt and disgust. Take her out and execute her, I said, tired of it all. My guard drew his sword and, without ceremony, cut her down right in front of me. I stared at the body for a long time, until the blood started to cool, and then I sighed. She said she was from another world. I thought she'd have some kind of special power. Can't even come back from the dead. And she had the nerve to brag to me. Just another lunatic. But it was this lunatic who had pushed me to the brink of annihilation in my last life. If I hadn't been lucky enough to be reborn, she would have actually won. Although, even in that timeline, she was no match for Isabella's so-called protagonist Halo, and ended up dead anyway. I had her body disposed of, and then had the prince and princess sent on their way to the afterlife as well. This world is a book? Transmigration? I don't understand any of it. All I know is that my 70 years of service were real. The people I fought with and fought for were real. And the suffering that this war brought upon everyone was real. No one is just a background character. Everyone is fighting for their own life. But so many of them died for someone else's great love story. They fought with everything they had, and it still wasn't enough to survive. I watched as their bodies were fed to the dogs, and only then did I return to my capital. This time, it was a true hero's return. The two nations were united. I moved the capital to the former border region, turning a place of war into the heart of a new empire. I invested heavily in agriculture and abolished the poll tax. Those were the easy parts. But when I announced that the land seized from the executed collaborators and oligarchs would be redistributed to the common people, I faced a firestorm of opposition. I'd been so focused on the war, I'd almost forgotten about them. One of the old guard senators stood up in the middle of the assembly, screaming that my plan would destroy the very foundations of our society. Then he ran headfirst into one of the marble pillars and died on the spot. I clapped my hands slowly, a grin on my face. Anyone else want to give it a try? The acoustics in here are pretty good. I killed a king and stole his throne. Did they really think I would be swayed by dramatic suicide? That I would worry about my reputation? I was more worried they'd start trying to redeem me again. After all, putting down the sword is the easiest way to get people to forgive you. I'd already seen that happen once. They knew their theatrical protests were useless against me. A short while later, they came to me with news that the southern provinces were on the brink of rebellion because of my new policies. I slammed my fist on the table and stood up. I'm an old man, my hair is white, but my spirit is strong. I'm still more than capable. My gaze, like a hawk's, swept across the room. I gave a sharp nod, and my guards immediately brought my armor. As they trembled in fear, stammering and asking what I was doing, I answered them with a cheerful smile. Going to fight, of course. It's what I do best. I was just starting to get bored. How wonderful that someone has volunteered to give me a little sport. Excellent. This is just excellent. No one expected this reaction. I was like an old, stubborn piece of iron. You can't boil me, you can't cook me, and you can't find a single crack to wedge your way in. But when I led my army south, I found no rebellion. None of the common people had even heard about my plan to give them land. I sent my soldiers out into the towns and villages to explain my policies and to explain exactly who was standing in the way. That night, fires lit up the southern cities. Now, there was a rebellion, but their anger wasn't directed at me. It was aimed at the wealthy landowners, the ones with friends in the capital, the ones who got advance warning and were fighting tooth and nail to stop the land redistribution. Their earlier protests in the capital had been just for show, but when word of this new, real rebellion reached them, some of them actually did die of rage. Others followed their colleagues' example and bashed their heads against the wall. One of them, mad with desperation, managed to storm the palace and confront me. "What are you trying to do?" he shrieked. "If you do this today, don't you fear that someone will do the same to you tomorrow? To your sons and grandsons?" I just laughed. I'm strong enough to hold this country together. No one would dare try that with me. And if my sons and grandsons are weak, they wouldn't be able to hold the throne anyway. If someone comes along who is willing to raise a sword against the crown for the sake of the people, then I say let him have the throne. It would be a worthy inheritance. Better him than these cowards who were ready to bow down to the Laurentians the moment they crossed the border. Maybe I really did go insane a long time ago. Back in my first life, when I saw what the princess did. When I watched the men I'd personally trained die in front of me. When I saw the country I had defended my whole life burn to the ground. That's when the old Jack Corrigan died. The thing that lives now is just an old ghost, a man who has finished his revenge, fulfilled his duty, and now wants to do something, anything, to make this world a better place. I am a ghost, and ghosts don't play by the rules of men. That seems reasonable, doesn't it? I acted with the full expectation that I would go down in history as a tyrant, a monster. But for some reason, the common people praised me to the heavens. Before, they called me a folk hero in whispers. Now, they were building monuments to me, carving my likeness in stone and praying to it. You see how much they've suffered? All I did was give them a chance to live, and they elevated me to the status of a god. The elites I fought against wrote their stories, did everything they could to slander me, to paint me as a villain. But they could write until their fingers bled, and they couldn't change the hearts of the people. The people may not be educated, but they aren't stupid. They know good from evil. At the age of 87, I died on the throne. After my death, some celebrated. They said the old bastard was finally gone. They tried to undo my work, to bribe historians to rewrite the past, to tarnish my legacy. And then they were struck by lightning. A very precise bolt of lightning. It fried the man to a crisp, but left the slanderous book he was writing completely untouched. They prayed to me, they believed in me, and so they made me a god. It makes sense. After all, this country doesn't suffer fools or idlers. A man as capable as me, who worked himself to death on the throne, is more than capable of continuing his work in the afterlife. 87 years old, the perfect age to start a new career. Although, I can't call myself an old man anymore. Up here, 87 is practically a baby. The other gods laugh at me when I call myself this old man. They say I'm young in age, but old in attitude. Damn, my seniority just took a nosedive. No matter, I'll work my way up. It's just that my performance reviews are always terrible because I keep smiting lovesick fools. It's making promotions very difficult. Why does the divine realm have to adopt the worst traditions from those transmigrator romance novels? It's completely unreasonable, but I'm going to keep smiting them. I have truly had enough of lovesick fools to last several lifetimes.